Hey everybody, welcome to part 2 of our discussion on the Golden Age of Athens. Yesterday we talked about Pericles and his 3 goals to improve Athens. Today we are going to talk about different aspects of the Golden Age: Greek religion, Greek architecture, and Greek sculpture. But first, I want to look at this diagram of Athens. There are 2 important parts of Athens that you need to know. Both of them are labeled in red. The first one is the Acropolis. The Acropolis is the hill above the city. On the Acropolis were temples. The most famous temple on the Acropolis in Athens was the Parthenon, the temple dedicated to Athena. We'll talk more about the Parthenon later in this lesson. On the screen is a photo of the Acropolis today and the remains of the Parthenon. As you can see, it is well elevated above the city. The second part you need to know of Athens was the Agora. The Agora was this open air marketplace. And so if you look at this illustration of the Agora, you see merchants buying and selling goods that they either made themselves or they brought back from distant lands. You also see the buying and selling of slaves in the Agora. In this marketplace, you would also see, political discussions. You would see philosophers teaching people, philosophers such as Socrates. You would see plays and religious ceremonies in the Agora. Along the Agora were public buildings, such as courts of law, the mint where they made their currency, and military headquarters were around the Agora. So Greek religion. Greeks worshipped many gods and goddesses. This made them polytheistic. Each god or goddess had power over a particular area of life. And you will learn about this when you do your God in the Box project. But there was a god of the sea, and a god of theater, and a god of, love, and a goddess of fertility and marriage. And so there's a god or goddess for each particular area of life. The gods and goddesses resembled and often acted like humans. They loved, they hated, they were jealous, just like humans, but they did not age and die. Each city-state had their own god or goddess who was thought to provide protection. So, for example, in Athens, Athena was their goddess of protection. Part of Greek religion were myths. A myth is a story about the gods. So a myth is stories about the gods. And an example of a myth was that the ancient Greeks believed that many of the gods and goddesses lived on top of Mount Olympus. That was their home. The Olympian gods and goddesses were part of everyday life. Religion played an important role in the life of ancient Greeks. And so when they traveled, they seeked advice from the gods. There was religious festivals and ceremonies. And so every part of life was, had something to do with the gods and goddesses. And the statue on the screen is of Zeus, the ruler of the gods. Greek architecture. Architecture is the art of designing buildings. So we're looking at how were buildings designed in ancient Greece, specifically Athens. And the main type of building were temples. Temples were meant to demonstrate the Greeks' idea of beauty. And to them, beauty was balance and order. Temples were built with rows of tall columns, as you can see from the picture of the temple, right? You see the tall columns. Temples were built as a home for the god or goddesses, not a place of worship. So it's not like the mosque or a church or a synagogue where you come in and you worship. The temple was meant to be the home of a god or goddess, and worship was done on the outside of the temple. Very few people actually went inside the temple. It was mainly priests and priestesses. So there were three different types of columns that you would see on Greek architecture. The first type is the simplest type, the Doric column. Then you would have the Ionic column, which has the swirls in it. And then you would have the Corinthian column, which was more complex and had carvings that looked like leaves. So these were the three different types of columns. Now here's a helpful hint. One of the bonuses on your test is to identify the different columns. So take a note. All right, the Doric, the Ionic, and the Corinthian column. Continuing talking about Greek architecture, the Parthenon. Again, I said we were going to talk about it. The Parthenon, one of the most beautiful temples in all of ancient Greece. It was built on a rectangular platform, as you can see in the picture. 8 columns in the front and back, 17 columns along the side. It had a slanted roof that created a triangle called pediment at the front and back. So if you go back to this picture, you can see the pediment, which is this triangle that's created in the front and back due to the slanted roofs. The triangle contained a band of sculptures called a frieze. The sculptures are called metopes. In the Parthenon, it contained a room with a magnificent statue of Athena. The statue was made of wood, covered in ivory, dressed in clothes, decorated with gold. All right, so this basically the only thing in the Parthenon was this great statue of Athena. All right, the Parthenon was one of the most beautiful temples in all of Greece, and as you can see in the picture, some of it still remains today. Greek sculptures. Sculpture is the art of creating three-dimensional figures from such materials as wood, stone, and clay. So three-dimensional figures. And so when they made sculptures, when they made sculptures in ancient Greece, they would set up the workshop near the site where they were making the sculptures. So that they would set up the site, they would set up a workshop near the site. They made a life-size clay model supported by wooden and metal frames. The general outline was then roughed in marble, which was an expensive material at the time. The master sculptor added details and finishing touches to his piece. The greatest achievement in ancient Greece was that they created lifelike statues. And early sculptures were influenced by Egyptian art. Later sculptures became more realistic with detailed muscles, hair, and clothing. Other artisans were involved in the making of these sculptures. Metal workers would add bronze pieces like spears and shields to the sculptures, to the statues. And there was painters who applied bright colors to the hair, the lips, the clothes, and the headdresses. So here is two different pictures. The first one that I'm circling right now is an early Greek statue. As you can see, it resembles more of the Egyptian way of art, where it's simple. But if you look at the later the later Greek sculpture, you can see the more detailed, more realistic aspects of this statue. The muscles, the hair, even the veins in the arm and the hand, and even you can see the ankle where he's bending. Right, the later Greek sculptures were very much realistic. Okay, so that is part 2 of the Golden Age of Athens. We'll do part 3, the final part, tomorrow.